I just think so often we need to live our way into a new way of thinking rather than trying to think our way into a new way of living. And so create spaces where people can live in, lean in. It should be handing somebody an apple and just say, taste this, like taste this tomato, like taste and see, like you're going to make more of this.
It's strawberry season, and recently some of my neighbors were walking down the street in front of our house while we were out there picking strawberries. Honestly, I'm always so excited to share what we've been growing with others, and so I gave them a couple strawberries to eat, and we chatted for a few minutes, and they began to walk away. And like a minute or two later, I just hear someone yell down the street like, "Caleb, these are so good." And they had just eaten the berries and received a small taste of God's intention for strawberries. Are you with me? It's like, if you know, you know. Like, after that, the store-bought ones are just like table decorations, right? Today, in the name of having everything we want, when we want, how we want it, creation has been given a sedative in many ways, especially when it comes to our food system. It's only a shadow of an existence compared to the lush garden that God desires for creation. Welcome back, my friends, to the ecoChristian podcast. I'm your host, Caleb Cray Haynes, and we're exploring what it means to be Christian on planet Earth. Today, I'm sitting again with farmer and professor Jason Adkins, and we're talking about all of this and also reflecting on a recent documentary called Common Ground, which, if you haven't seen it, I really hope you'll catch it because it's a wonderful film. And in our conversation, we wrestle with the difficult intersection of, I'm going to say, quote, machines and creation. And fittingly, that brings me to two quick caveats to share with you before you hear this conversation. Number one, that Jason and I recorded this sitting outside in the urban farm and in very close proximity to a radio tower. So my old school recording equipment picked up a radio show that is faintly in the background of our conversation. So you're welcome. It's like a 2-for-1 situation. And if you hear random voices, it may not be in your head. Number two, second, I'll say that there is a good deal of perhaps satire or sarcastic banter with Jason and I. So sorry, not sorry. Here we go. Today, friends, we have the faithful return of Jason Adkins, who is the urban farmer and professor of environmental justice here at Trevecca Nazarene University in Nashville. Jason was here with me back in an earlier episode 6, actually.
Wow.
So long ago. And we had such a great time. And I think that was actually still maybe like our top charted episode.
Caleb, I'm not surprised at all.
So very, very good stuff. Jason and I have been running in circles together for so many years. We're dizzy. And so I'm excited for people to hear from you on such occasions like this. So what's up?
Good to see you. Just sitting out here in the wild of the Trevecca Urban Farm. We've got some muscadines growing to our right, some overshadowed by some pawpaws. Let's see. We've got some pretty tall mulberries.
Yeah.
Going over.
Ooh.
Well, I mean, the food is about to start falling.
Oh man, I love that. Do you have to shake the tree a lot to get them to come down, or they just kind of come down on their own?
It depends on how ambitious I am.
Yeah.
If I've got the energy, I'll just shake the tree. If not, I'll just wait till they fall on me.
There you go.
Right on. Let it rain mulberries. So yeah, I think that's a good, we are here in the in-between section between, we've got your chickens here to my left, and to my right, we've got machines roaring, people trying to colonize grass and all sorts of things. So it's a good juxtaposition for this episode. So what'd you get into this weekend? Did you do any gardening? Farming?
I actually installed a beehive. One of my friends, Derry, who is the chef, the head chef at Cumberland University, is an active beekeeper, and right here in the heart of South Nashville, has 6 hives in his backyard, which is the legal limit. Oh. So any more hives he capture, he gives to me or other lucky beekeepers. So he called me and said, "Do you want a beehive?" And I said, "Yes." So that day, went and picked
the answer to that is yes.
It was, yeah. Went up and picked a little gray box full of bees that he'd captured in a swarm, and so brought them back, and with the help of Lincoln, my son, we installed them, and
that's awesome.
They're making themselves at home.
That's cool.
About 20 feet from where we're talking right now.
Now, do you have like a bee suit that you suit up in, or you're just kind of?
Do. Okay. Yeah. I'm not one of those.
I see those. I see those like Instagram videos of people just like bare arming it with bees.
Going commando into the hive. I've done it. That is to say, without a veil. Sometimes I will, depending on what I'm doing. Yeah. But if I'm doing anything where I'm getting deep into the hive,
right,
I'm not going to be a hero. I'm just going to put a veil on.
That's, after growing up watching My Girl and seeing who I think was Macaulay Culkin die, I just can't.
Yeah, I know. He somehow evaded 2 very determined thieves in the heart of New York, some experienced bad guys, and then wound up dead at the hands of God's beautiful creatures like that.
Dude,
that you saw what he
traumatic.
Yeah. It's like you're thinking, I don't even know if I could do the Home Alone stuff. So how could I possibly survive bees if Macaulay Culkin can't?
Yeah. That's right. And honestly, we could just end this episode right here, but yeah, that's good stuff. So we're sitting here, on campus, and I've been like an old man all weekend, because I planted a bunch of seeds like late last week, and I've just been like going out every day to see if they germinated yet. You know what they say, watched seed never germinates, and so
that's what grandmother used to say.
Yeah, so hasn't happened yet. So so we're out here near your farm, or Trevecca's farm, or God's farm, whichever. It's all perspective. So and if you know Jason, you know that he loves goats, and not just like greatest of all time stuff, although maybe, but like goats, like the real ones. And in fact, I wanted to take this brief moment and peel back a quick layer, because Jason and I have worked together for a long time, and every time we're doing a conference or a webinar and I ask for a headshot, Jason always sends me this legit photo of you solemnly staring off into the distance with like these trippy colors, and there's a goat with you, and the goat's got like flowers around its neck, and it just never gets old. But like, is there an origin story to this photo? Like what?
Well, I'd said to a good friend and former student of mine, Tabitha, who worked here for a while. She was really good at graphic art, and is Tabitha Sugdeo. And I was like, those cool 80s shots where you've got like somebody staring kind of obliquely off into the corner of the frame, and then there's like a sort of faded in picture of like their wife or their child, I'd love one of those with a goat. And she's just produced it.
That's amazing.
If I'm ever tempted to get I try to keep myself close to the ground. And if anybody ever sends me like some serious speakers, like we need a bio and a picture, I send that. I try to get light.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
I'll not forget my roots.
Yeah, that's right. everyone remember your roots with the goat in the 80s. So recently, it was Earth Day, and Jason and I got the chance to host a screening of the newest film, Common Ground, which I hope that everyone has heard of it. It actually, there were screening opportunities all across, I know at least America, on Earth Day and around the sort of week around Earth Day for this film, if you got the chance to see it. And we did a screening here on campus, and it was pretty rock and roll. I know we usually think of nature documentaries. It sounds kind of BBC, and I like BBC documentaries, and but TBH, there were a lot of great folks involved in this one, and it had Aquaman in it,
Mm-hmm.
Jason Momoa. It was basically like Aquaman 3, and it was
Childish Gambino.
yeah. No, so it was really good. Also had Laura Dern and Woody Harrelson and all that stuff. And it follows sort of the story of American farmers and the agricultural industrial complex that is still at large today, and basically how all the ways that we do farming in America, or at least the kinds of farming that gets the money and the funding and the educational backing, is simultaneously the kind of farming that, as it works to produce food, is actively making it so that we may not have food in the future. Anyway, so Jason, as someone who farms literally right here in a very different kind of farm, what are some of the things that stood out to you?
Well, it was kind of different like installments of the gospel we preach around here, really, which is that regenerative agriculture is a movable lever by which we could tip things in a better direction. And there are other levers that need to be pushed, of course, but by some accounts, up to 51% of the carbon problem is agriculturally related. So in terms of when you add up all the costs of producing food in the industrial system, from tractors to tillage to the amount of carbon that goes up into the air when you till, erosion and that land's inability to store the carbon that was once safely stored there. You could go on and on with the transportation and the processing and the refrigeration and the amount of waste. And then in the dump where food is rotting, that becomes methane gas, which is more than 25 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So all along the food system, there are these incredible violations of natural communities, orders, and human and animal abuses happening. And if we're going to tackle climate change and all the intersectional justice challenges that accompany that, the most reachable and movable kind of points of action are I believe, in the food sector. And they're all just right there. We could stop eating industrial meat today, just as consumers. We could, a lot of us at least, could make the choice to eat less or eat no industrial meat, and would have a huge impact on the world.
Yeah, I think about like the lens in which we see food, and one of the things, just as you're talking, that jumped out at me is like the language we use around like how we eat, and I wonder where, like, in history, the sort of like 3 meals a day thing came from. There's all this language. There's like the 3 meals a day, and even like the word, or the use of the word meal, and what we think of when we think of meal. And I think about that, of course, that nutritional triangle that we all grew up with, that we could get into that. And I also thinking about our oldest daughter. One of her things, and I don't know where it came from, but oftentimes we'll, like, especially on the weekends, we'll do like a meal that's just like an amalgam of leftovers from all the other meals we've been cooking. and or we'll just, we'll call it kind of like a snack meal or something. And she gets upset because she's like, but we need a main course. Like, well, where's the main course? We're like, what are you talking about? Like, where did you even get that from? Like, culture, But
It's like tapas day
yeah,
at the Hade's house.
yeah.
These tapas plates, small plates.
Yeah,
That's what we're doing.
little ones. So I don't know. I think that's kind of like an image that pops in my head when we think about like changing the way we eat and some of the challenges that are in the way of like these pictures of our posture towards eating and the meals and the courses, and obviously the protein is the big one when we think about the industrial ag complex with meat and everything.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that always stands out to me, and they reiterated in this documentary, that I'll state as the guy with the leaf blowers encroaching behind us here, but it's unescapable, is how so much of the food that we grow is not directly for us, but it just goes right back to feeding our livestock.
Yeah. Trying to think. Yeah, Jonathan Safran Foer, in his book We Are the Weather, says something like, Earth is basically been turned into a feedlot for humans and their animals. Like over 95% of all the mammalian land mass, all the pounds of mammals, more than 95% are humans and the animals that they raise for meat and dairy. So it's tremendous how much the biodiversity of the earth has been basically pushed out to provide these massive spaces for not just the animals that we eat, but the land needed to feed those animals with grain. Many of those animals aren't evolved to eat grain. That's just what we feed them because it's the way the system works. And so it was really striking in this film, this Common Ground film, to see the way farmers had not only transformed their farms to be places that sequestered tremendous amounts of carbon, but that they were making more money doing it that way. And as a result of not having to apply pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and not having to medicate their herds like they had previously with high doses of antibiotics just fed into their feed, and their feed costs themselves had just dropped away because they were feeding them on pasture in an intensive grazing model, which was basically the cow stays on the grass 1, 2, 3 days, they're moved, and that piece of ground, that small piece of ground, does not see a cow again for months or even a year. And it allows the grass to rebuild, and in the process is sequestering a lot of carbon.
Yeah, it's this I mean, it's as radical as mimicking nature, and I think that part of the documentary really stuck out to me as well when they had the whole beaver. They mentioned beavers, and it was like how you're saying, like the ranchers started to sort of mimic nature in the way they graze their cattle, and then like one thing led to another, and all of a sudden it's like God's ecological restoration starts showing up, one species and another, and then there was and then the beavers came. And you don't really think about it, but they're like these keystone species that even affect like the water temperature and all the, it was like beavers equal hope. And I thought that was wonderful. So kind of back to I know we're kind of playing around about the goats and stuff though, but I wonder, as a farmer, if you could talk about that, more about that relationship between our agriculture and our animals and sort of that importance there, and especially in a time where we've separated these things, right? They don't happen in the same spaces, obviously industrially, and how that's sort of part of the problem in itself.
Yeah, I think Michael Pollan puts it pretty aptly when he describes the industrial system. And he says, industrial agriculture took a solution and divided it neatly into two problems. The solution was small farms that integrated animals and crops. And the waste from the animals fed the crops that were raised. The leftover parts of the crops that weren't used for humans were given back to the animals. And so it was a continuous ecosystem where each part fed the other part. And I actually got introduced to this in my very first farming book, which was Complete Guide to Self-Sufficiency by James Seymour.
Nice.
It was this British guy. And if you ever get this book, it's still awesome. He's got like, okay, if you have a backyard, it could look like this. And he's got everything in its place, like plants, a few ducks, maybe some chickens, maybe some rabbits. He's got like your plan. And he's like, okay, if you got an acre, it could look like this. If you got 5 acres, it could look like this. And it just is the coolest thing. And what you can see in those diagrams is that like each part moves around and feeds the other parts. So the wastes from one system are the food of another part of the system. And it's self-regulating. It was there that I really saw, if you're a farmer, you get to basically orchestrate an ecosystem. You get to be like this maestro that brings in these pieces so that they work together and they're like functioning. They're controlling each other's pests. They're controlling each other's waste streams. And kind of like Barbara Kingsolver said of the jungle, it eats itself and lives forever.
So good. I love that quote. It's so good.
Yeah. And that's like what a sustainable or even regenerative, that's what a sustainable farm looks like. A regenerative farm, and this can often happen on these same farms, are actually deepening the topsoil, increasing the biodiversity. They're not just keeping things the same as they found it. They're actually building topsoil. They're actually sequestering more carbon than they're using to produce food. And so these become these, like, unsurprisingly, ecological preserves, and really demonstrate the created purposes of humans. This idea that we could not only, like, most of our efforts, as Ben Fulton notes, is to be less bad, like be eco, lower our footprint. Well, as he points out, by this logic, it's kind of better off that you weren't around. Like, you did a great job of having a low footprint. Eventually, you'd have zero footprint.
Right.
He's like, but I like do want to live, and I want things to live around me better because I lived. And so, if we're actually doing that, then our footprint we want to enlarge because it's a good impact. You know?
Yeah. It raises kind of a larger question that I've been marinating on, and kind of backs a little bit to the documentary, and I know lots of books and documentaries have taken a stab at describing what is sort of that larger problem that a lot of it really began after World War II. And some people point out, like during the war, that around like 20 million home gardens were producing like 40% of America's food, like which they would just tell us now that that's not possible. But like we were already so, adapted more closely to the land at that point in our history, even 100 years ago. But after the war, right, that all the engineering and the money and the weapon development and the machinery and honestly the jobs as well, a lot of the jobs that we put into the war effort, it was kind of like a scramble to keep the engines revving, and so they turned it all toward the agricultural effort, and so after the war they had all this quote unquote product left. And all these components were used to make bombs, sort of turned into fertilizer and pesticides and all this stuff. And so, in turn, we sort of went to war with nature, in our own food, in our own bodies. Anyway, I just think about that violent imagery. And I think a lot of times when we think about creation care, we think about it as like that would be a good thing to opt into when I get around to it, or if I have the time or whatever, as this sort of other thing over here. But I almost wonder if there is such a thing as neutral ground. Does that make sense? Like are we? I'm curious what you think about this. Like, is the choice like participate in this violence toward nature, or get to work with the regenerative and the hopeful part, like with the beavers? You know, does that make sense? I'm just sort of like processing this.
Yeah, I tend to think that we're going to be on one side or the other, and understanding that we're born on the side of exploiter. I mean, the way Wendell Berry talks about this in his essay, I guess it's The Unsettling of America, is the nurturers versus exploiters. It kind of divides them into two kind of different kinds of people and different kinds of communities of people, and describes them like really beautifully and kind of sharply in those terms. And so yeah, I think we are born on the side of exploiter in this culture typically, but not without plenty of models of nurture around us to draw from. But the way our homes are built, the way our food is raised, the way our clothes are made, the way our energy is produced, all those are, if you follow the storyline, end in some ruined rural community where people aren't being paid, and their water's probably polluted, and they're being exploited in various ways. And so all those stories need to be rewritten, and we need to do that together. But we won't rewrite them if we don't know them. And I think there's profit in keeping those stories quiet. And this is a film that kind of exposes a lot of things about the dirty dealings of corporations that have basically bought the governmental agencies that are charged to protect us, and we have the food system that money bought rather than that really has our best interest of our land and the people that depend on it and the creatures that depend on it in hand. So, and I think just to finish the thought around the industrial farm, we had this system pre-World War II that was functioning, poorly in some places, but was functioning. It was mostly horse-powered. Had a lot of advantages, had a lot of community cohesion, and a lot of racism. All of that was true. A lot of sort of spoiled landscapes, but still some intact farming communities. And that really went away for good after World War II, after the industrialization that you're describing. Because all the processes that you just mentioned, bigger tractors, bigger chemicals, all the things, all the additions, farmers did not make more money. They just had to pay for a whole lot more things, and they started into a debt spiral that some of them got out fast and some of them got out slow, but they're all spiraling around a debt spiral. No way. Their success was their failure, in that the great productive power of industrial agriculture drove down the prices for those commodities they were growing. And so as they became very successful in producing a lot of food, the law of supply and demand brought the prices that were returned to them below the cost of production.
Right.
And so this film sort of shows how farmers can get off that treadmill.
Yeah.
Among other things.
Right. Anytime we kind of get in this conversation, it always just blows my mind that my multiple minds, that that we can know these, just how sinister so much of it is, and all the lobbyists that we actively promote this system that it's bad for these for instance, back to the sort of like talking about particularly just the cattle industry, and it's bad for the animals, it's bad for the land, and it's bad for us here consuming any of it, and you see the graphs that chart our health and all of it, and it's just like all the numbers are there, all the data's there, all the stories are there, all the families are there who've lost loved ones. It's all there, but yet the money pipeline continues. And I think that part is discouraging, but at the same time, becomes I think a catalyst for the fire in our gut for so many of us to do what we do. Yeah. Anyway, I'm glad that you brought up Wendell Berry, because I just jotted down this quote that I like, where he says, it is impossible to mechanize production without mechanizing consumption. Impossible to make machines of soil, plants, and animals without making machines also of people.
It's so true. Yeah. It's really interesting how, sometimes, and get off on a nerdy tangent, but one of the great agrarians of the 20th century was J.R.R. Tolkien. And he's actually got a lot to say in his letters and writings about what his story kind of means to him. And, at some point, the wizard goes bad, Saruman, when his mind is made of metal and wheels, as described by Treebeard. And yeah, I think there's something that he says in the film, something like the forests of the old world will burn in the fires of industry. And you just wonder, what's at the end of all that? Just a blighted land that doesn't produce anything.
Mordor.
Yeah, Mordor. And also the kind of self-defeating logic you see in Dr. Seuss's Lorax tale, where he creates this truffalo tree factory, this mead factory that ends up they cut all the trees down, all the jobs go away, and then there's just blighted land and no jobs, which is you're seeing in this film, it kind of holds up. You could farm indefinitely in these regenerative ways, but if you want to keep farming like you're farming, you've got about 40 harvests left, if we're lucky, and then you're down to bedrock or sand or something that won't grow anything.
We're living on Mars.
Yeah. I think this film does a good job of showing how delicate it all is,
Right.
And they have some powerful graphs of how much carbon was sequestered in these fields, and it's very hopeful. Just by changing the way farmers are moving their cattle, they're changing the whole balance of they're actually sequestering more carbon than they're costing the world, and that's what we have to start doing.
So much there. Honestly, I'm still stuck on Lord of the Rings. And because every time there's a little bit more, and I do think, like you're saying, back to the sort of the Wendell Berry quote, and impossible to make machines of soil and plants and animals and without making machines of us, and as you were talking, I was thinking about that and the Treebeard. Man, we just need more Treebeard. But if you know. But when Saruman, we're gonna nerd out here, but when Saruman is sort of cutting down all the trees and transforming the landscape into that sort of Mordor depleted place in order to produce the work of Sauron, and is sort of creating this sort of hell-like environment to, in the end, as it to create out of that come the orcs, right? These sort of different kind of creatures that come out of a posture, a Mordor type posture, if that makes sense. And honestly, and as goofy as some listeners might think all this is, but that's a lot of what I feel like we witness today, with how our bodies are being remade by chemicals and even plastic, right? And how all of what has gone into God's creatures and the soil is in our bodies, and we are being remade into the the kind of image that we are domineering over the earth, if that makes sense. Anyway,
yeah.
One of my also total spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen the film. Sorry, but not sorry. There's this scene where they bury underwear, and they bury. It was like a pair of whitey tighties. Which the funny thing is I had my kids were there watching it with us, and I had recently had a fun conversation with my daughters because they didn't know what whitey tighties were. And I was like, they're like, yeah, underwear or whatever. And so they pull a pair out, and I leaned over and I was like, that's whitey tighties. And then they're like, what? And they bury a pair like in the farmer's good soil, and then in the soil that's been like desertified, right? That's deplete, like our typical, And then what was it like after like a week or 30 days? I can't remember. After a short period of time, they pulled it out, and of course, the one that has been buried in the good soil was just like nothing left but the elastic band, and then the pair that came out of like the industrial farm soil was just like completely intact, and sort of highlighting the lack of microbial life. And I thought that was, I don't know if you've ever tried burying your underwear or anything.
Not for that reason, no.
Yeah.
I would there are some things I'd like to demonstrate, like on the farm. It just like the principles. I mean, it comes back to, reminds me of Bill Mollison saying, like, even though the problems of our age are myriad and incredibly thorny, their solutions are embarrassingly simple. And, these farmers are just mimicking nature in some way. How does nature move animals? How does nature, one of the first questions of permaculture is, what would my ecosystem be doing here if I weren't here? What would this be? What would this place want to be? And once you figure that question out in some sort of details, you can sort of align your goals with the intention of nature in your place. And you find that nature's pushing you. It's the wind's at your back. If you're trying to do something nature doesn't want to do in your place, i.e. like a monoculture of animals or crops, and that's going to be true everywhere. There's no ecosystem that loves a monoculture. Nature hates monocultures. She will take them down. And no matter how many chemicals we pour on those fields to try to stop that from happening. So, knowing what nature wants to do in your place, and, we're watching forests and savannas and even desert land, and seeing that these places can be Edens of their own distinct type. If humans that are managing them could just like watch and see what nature wants to do there and then do that. So in the West, in the grasslands of the Midwest, you start with the buffalo and the birds that follow them, and often the people or the animals that would hunt them and would move them along so that they would drop their manure, eat a lot of food, go, and then birds would follow them, picking apart their manure and spreading it around the ground, and then the grasses would flush back. And when they were eaten, the saliva of the ruminant actually stimulates the grass to go into hyperdrive and start producing more grass because it's getting chomped on. And whatever proportion of its leaves or its top side of the grass gets eaten, it drops that much root mass. And that's all now soil carbon. That's soil organic matter. And then it quickly springs back and grows new roots to equal basically as below, so above, as above, so below. So you kind of get a proportional root to like grass or tree mast.
Right.
So, I mean, that's how over zillennia, these animals created 10, 20, 30-foot topsoil. It's just eating, pooping, dying, moving, breeding, repeat forever. And so farmers are on their ranches imitating that movement.
Right. I probably bring it up too much as our early Genesis, poetic narrative about creation, and and if you want to take any of it literally, and obviously it's so informative for our story, but I think about like the idea of the human naming and being with these animals, and you think about like, wait. So we're all these animals in the garden. It's like this was a loaded community. If it, you know what I'm saying. But whatever you believe about that, like of course they were. Of course, like from everything we know, history is saturated with God's creatures, because this is a creatured place that we live here on, and now so many of the spaces that we occupy are not that creatured anymore, if that makes sense. Especially in urban areas. And one of the things, like I'm always trying to convince my wife to let us get some alpacas but of course there's like zoning issues. Like we've systematically made it harder to be in harmony and regenerative spirit with creation in places. And you realize part of the work, in addition to eating well, is advocating well for these changes.
Absolutely.
One of the things that always stands out, we're talking about Barry and the unsettling of America and everything, and one thing that always stands out with Wendell Berry is how I appreciate how he makes fun of people. Like to be honest, like he'll like read such and such essay, and he's always talking about butts, what's his name?
Earl Butts.
Earl Butts, because it's just the worst. And but and I forget who it is where he talks about their quote unquote vision for the future of like how we're gonna just go into this place of infinite resources and infinite energy, somehow, like whereas literally I think the quote was like, we're gonna transcend our finiteness and all that. Anyway, and on the flip side of that, you mentioned a minute ago, like, so say we've got something like 40 to 50 good harvests left of the way that we're feeding the world. I mean, that's scary, right? Like it's, I think Barry, I think Unsettling of America, right? That was like written in the 70s. We're quite a few years beyond that now. Like, and obviously there's a lot of different stats out there, and it's hard to like throw out a statistic and all that. But the reality remains, like, we live on a finite planet with finite resources. And if we continue in a posture that is draining and sucking and life-taking, like there's only so much to take. And anyway, I'm curious, like if Jason Adkins were to have a playful vision of what a regenerative, of what a real hopeful vision would look like. Does that make sense? What would you say to that? Or what kind of images come to mind of like a society that functions with 9 billion people in a proper way? Like what would that begin to look like?
Yeah. Well, that's luckily we don't have to imagine. Like we can actually find communities that are already inhabiting that. It would look like indigenous land use. And it's not like there was no extinctions that happen under indigenous watch, but 70 to 80% of the world's biodiversity presently, even with so little land returned to indigenous communities presently, that much biodiversity is in the hands of indigenous communities. And so protecting indigenous rights to land and expanded land use for indigenous peoples is one of our, great goals, preserving what's left and expanding what is. Some of that expansion has happened and some of the retraction has happened. And if you look in Brazil, there's a big battle over indigenous land rights. And those rights are incredibly imperiled, and with it, the health of the world's most diverse ecosystem. So that's huge. I found that you really can't speak for other places, but you can keep an eye out for good work. And so we've been invited around the world as a farm, as a group, as a studying group of students in our environmental justice program, to give input on the shaping of different agricultural projects in Philippines and in different parts of Africa. And there is a sort of colonial idea that the wealthy West has got all the answers, and I think that's part of the reason we may be called to these places. So there's a university farm, and actually that's a very dangerous notion, because in the name of spreading American agriculture, a lot of communities around the world have been damaged, and some of them deeply, deeply damaged by putting industrial agriculture onto, sort of foisting it onto the majority world farmers that could not bear the burden of having to buy new seeds, and the fertilizers that made those seeds work, and the irrigation that made those seeds grow, and all the things, the cascade of expenses that farmers used to not have to bear. It's been catastrophic for world farming. So we don't want to do that. But what we do is we find on the internet, by word of mouth, good works that are around the locus of where we're going, and we take a field trip with their people and our people, and we kind of explore what does it look like. And I've seen examples of urban agriculture in Dakar, Senegal, in Manila, and Baguio City that were actually absolutely extraordinary. I mean, communities growing almost all their own food within the city limits. So yes, liberating people to grow whatever food they need to grow in their yards. There is a prejudice against farming, like when we were advocating for the legalization of chickens in Nashville back in, I don't know, maybe 2010 or 11, someone stood up in opposition of the chicken bill and said, it seems like this is a move backwards. The country's for growing food and the city's not. And so, obviously that's a terrible thought for a lot of reasons. But I'm glad he said the soft part loud, because I think that is actually what people think, is that, like, to grow food in your yard shows, like, I don't know, maybe you're too poor to buy your food. Like, success is buying food. Poverty is growing your own food. Like this association of food production with poverty.
Wow.
And so, like, remaking our attitudes around that, and so backyards connected, people sharing plants, a neighborhood greenhouse where everybody grows their starts and then they go out into people's yards. The elimination of lawns by choice, by encouragement from micro grants from the city to turn lawns into xeriscapes, into productive places for food and habitat. And I'm glad to say a lot of that work is happening in little ways.
Yeah.
It could happen in bigger ways, but we have Cumberland River Compact planting trees everywhere. We're one of their partners. We plant trees with them. We have the same organization helping people build rain gardens, roof catchment. Their rebates on living roofs for city taxes. Their rebates on water catchment. So all sorts of things are happening.
Yeah.
And legalizing animal, like some sort of maybe goats and chickens and ducks.
Yeah. I think these are huge leaps. Like, I don't even really think like we fully comprehend how important these little laws are, and working toward changing those. Like, anyway, I could harp on that, but get to know your representative. And I love that you brought up first, indigenous land and that sort of, sacred relationship that they often have with where they live. And I just think about that sort of relationship, and honestly, to make the leap into sort of a conversation around the faith community, and I talk to pastors a lot who want to chat about like, some fresh imagination about their green space and stuff. It's like, man, how cool would it be? We all just need like a garden pastor on staff or something.
I just think about that passage from Isaiah where it's like nobody will have to ask, like, how do you know God? Like, everybody's going to know God, from like the youngest to the oldest person in society. So like, translating that into like, nobody has to ask how to grow some, like, everybody's going to know how to do this in the kingdom of God. Like, it seems like right now it's a chore to say, hey, maybe don't use your lawn for grass, maybe grow. I mean, that sounds like a big deal, but I've been places where every space that could be spared was used for food production. But it wasn't illegal. It was culturally appropriate, and so it was just something everybody did, was grow food in their homes, And the separation of home is, again, Wendell Berry points out, is like a place of consumption, not a place of production. Whereas that's a radical severance historically. Is always a place where you produce the means to live for yourself and perhaps others. And so now home's just somewhere you go and flop and watch like industrially packaged entertainment on your TV. It's not a place where you go back and you grow your food, grow habits.
Right.
But
like being alive with. Yeah. Yesterday, we were looking at the text in John 15 where it's the gardener imagery that Jesus uses, and that verse about abiding in me, and in this sort of like multifaceted way that that we can try to nail down or describe or define what it means to abide. And there's sort of this tree in the branch metaphor, and I think that really comes to mind as you were talking there about like, what does it mean to abide with, to live with. Yeah, I think there's a lot there when it comes to like the places that we live, and that the way that what we're created for, and this sort of relationship. Now, I'm not trying to, I guess I should clarify, I'm not trying to conflate like the earth with God or anything for clarity, but I think it's a really helpful framework to think about like what it means to abide somewhere, and how of course that imagery is reflective of also our quote unquote spiritual life and how we abide with God. And that everything in creation is, I believe, helps mirror that intended relationship, and it's so much more intertwined than I think we always try to separate those things. But, well, any last words of wisdom that you want to throw out there as we're wrapping up our time?
Yeah, something that you've mentioned before is just like, the fact that we're talking about it is incredibly important, and that's something that Catherine Aho points out, like the most important thing you could do about climate change. I mean, the most important thing to do here is just dream together, because our imaginaries have really been sort of shrunk down by what is. I think a few of us are just going to have to build these little oases against the industrial models and invite people into them constantly, because that's where imagination really begins to take shape. I was lucky enough to see different places. It gave me imagination for my own place. And I just think so often we need to live our way into a new way of thinking rather than trying to think our way into a new way of living. And so create spaces where people can live in, lean in. It should be handing somebody an apple and just say, taste this tomato, like taste and see, like you're going to make more of this.
Yeah.
And so creating those spaces. And I think if we're doing anything at Trevecca, I think it's just kind of creating a little gratuitously fun oasis in the middle of a food desert, and like, this isn't like, it has to be where the party is too. I would believe that the revolution always needs to be the best party in town. And if we're not having fun, then we're not doing credit to like the goodness of the work.
Yeah.
And so I want to be with people that are energized for what they do,
Yeah.
that are just alight with sort of the light of God in the justice of their cause and the beauty of their work. It's got to be beautiful. It's got to be fun. It's got to be real. I think it's got to be poor. I don't think it can be made of a lot of money.
Yeah.
And it's got to be about building community, because it's the community that sustains this kind of work. And otherwise, we're just sort of growing something that's going to get lost.
Absolutely.
Growing children for calamity. So I think we, you know, a lot of us that get animated by the farming part of this sometimes fail to pay enough attention to the social and community side of this, because that's, you know, if you want to build a really cool yard, you can do that by yourself. If you want to recreate culture, that's where you invite people into your really cool cool yard and make it a locus of community.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Let's build the party. Let's make it beautiful. Let's make it really diverse. And just lastly, this film does a really good job of highlighting indigenous farmers, Black farmers, Latinx farmers.
Yep.
Whereas the prequel to this was pretty white, male centered, and it got some critique over that. And they really responded, I thought. And so it's lovely to see the diversity of the kingdom of heaven and earth coming together. And man, this really highlights that. So that was a joy.
That's so good. That's such a great note to end on. And I'm so glad that you brought up like the fun and the joy of it. And I think that's what always strikes me. And, you know, with the whole conversation and getting your hands in the dirt and creating something and getting to see like life blossom, like, and then getting to taste it. I mean, that's, thank you for sharing that imagery. We've got all of our strawberries kind of coming at the house right now. So, it is like so vibrant. It's like, you know, tasting a store strawberry next to one of these. It's just like, it's dumb, you know? Yeah. You're like, what are we doing? And yeah, so good. Well, thanks for carving out some time, brother. It's been so much fun.
Great to be with you, Caleb. Thanks for having me.
Friends, I hope that these conversations will prove to be a catalyst for you to do your own work, digging deeper into your own local soil and issues and work of earth care around you. And hey, let me know if I can be of help. Our podcast email is always in the show notes. And don't forget to share this episode with your roommate or your aunt or your pastor or anyone else who you can think of that eats or breathes. Grace and peace, friends.